expectations, assumptions, work. In an environment ruled by the external, sometimes it can seem like the only way forward is to present an idealized version of yourself, a perfect one that makes everyone happy, never vulnerable and never failing, at least, not in the eyes of others. If there is one character to embody this mindset, it's Sunday. We've finally gotten more information about him since version 2.7, and oh my god, there is so much to talk about. About 2 months ago, I posted a full psychological analysis of Sunday, which dove deep into the specific type of complex trauma explored by his character, but the more recent content has both solidified all that I talked about, and convinced me that it actually goes way deeper, heavily exploring the concepts of shame, how it shapes a person's identity, and how to overcome it. So if you're interested in learning more about Sunday, confused about his story quest, or if you're just curious about the real-world issues explored by his character, then you've come to the right place. I'm Phantom Height, and as someone in psychology and game design, I'm once again here to talk about the bird with broken wings. I also made a Ko-fi account if you'd like to support me in making more analysis videos, so hi, link in description. Since I will be discussing trauma and psychological issues today, please ensure that you're okay with these topics before going on. I will once again be putting source passages from any books or studies that I cite on screen, and I'll play a sound effect when they come up in case you are listening instead of watching and still want to check them out. This is the sound, and with that out of the way, let's get into it. As I've mentioned, Sunday's past identity was largely constructed from shame, the belief that something is fundamentally wrong with him, which created a major obstacle for his recovery that has since become the forefront of his new story content. I'm going to avoid retreading territory from my last video as much as possible, so if I don't talk about a key point from older updates, that's why, but his shame is something I want to dive much deeper into today. Its origins and the ways in which he curated a false identity to cover it are extremely important for understanding his healing process, so I'm going to start by breaking that down first. Something that has remained consistent is the fact that Sunday has a hard time expressing himself. He finds discomfort in any approach to the world that does not involve hiding his true personality and feelings, which is reflected across all of his paranoid and control-seeking behavior. While we had seen bits of this mindset in the past, through factors like his hypervigilance, his rigidly analytical speech, and him stating he needed to leave behind his childlike side, Hoyolab posted a set of his childhood journals that give us a more explicit glimpse into the direct experiences that shut him down, initiating the spiral from a wondrous loving child to an adult who cannot even admit he likes his sister's music. The early pages of young Sunday's journal show a great deal of curiosity and positivity toward the world, with him running silly experiments to learn more each day and openly expressing his appreciation for others. But these traits start to disappear after a few key events. For one, there is of course the Charmony Dove incident. We see how much effort he put into trying to help the injured bird fly, providing warm blankets and nutritious food, all while grooming its feathers and even playing music to keep its spirits up. And yet, the dove continued to fall and crash as he watched helplessly. I want to draw attention to the bottom of the page, where Sunday cries about how he cannot save the bird and repeatedly asks why. Why did it turn out like this? These lines have a much deeper significance in the context of the religious beliefs of the Harmony. Something that causes a lot of conflict for Sunday is being taught that his god will help everyone, only to see time and time again that only stronger people flourish while the weak continue to suffer. He states in his character demo that as the Bronze Melodia confessor, he had to listen to the pleas of distressed people while knowing that no god would ever save them unconditionally. It makes him wonder why some fail to meet that condition, and it eventually leads to him posing the question, if you are born weak, which god should you turn to for solace? As he genuinely feels there is no answer. The important part, though, is the implications that are created. Particularly, these beliefs create the idea that that little Charmony Dove was just too weak to be saved, that Sunday himself, despite his best efforts, was just too weak to do anything about it, that people can simply be born hopeless or defective to the point of not deserving salvation. It creates major feelings of shame, planting the seeds for repression, as Sunday is forced to wonder what's wrong with him for things to turn out this way. Many other aspects of his life support this idea as well. My last video talked about a number of the actual events that changed him, such as how each time he expressed his personality as the Bronze Melodia, it backfired and taught him to stop. But the new content has a lot of moments where he directly owns up to his feelings. He describes himself as the person who always disappoints his sister in 2.7, and in a book you can find in the Grand Theater, there is dialogue where Robin states that she and Sunday were supposed to fly into the sky together, and Sunday simply hesitates before saying, "If only I could." Another recurring theme in 2.7 is that he often cannot handle people seeing him for who he is, preferring to keep his disguise up even when it is unnecessary. Deep down, Sunday has been shaped by toxic shame, the self-fulfilling belief that something is fundamentally wrong with him and he can never succeed. That's where the Order comes in, fostering the mindset of repression by painting it as an ideal to strive for, all while demonizing free will under the guise of saviorism. In his 4th journal page, Sunday writes about his early lessons with Gopher Wood and the level of perfectionism expected of him. He is taught to keep his tie on the center line, to never allow his shirt to protrude from his vest, to keep his trouser creases perfectly straight and always align with the tips of his shoes. There are a great number of rules, all of which Sunday is taught to never break around other people. In other words, he is trained to remain hypervigilant and to never allow another person to see his imperfections, and if he does end up slipping, he would be scrutinized under the spotlight of everyone in Penacony due to his celebrity status, or be forced to act otherwise by the corrective measures enforced by the family, leading even 1 week to comment on how iron-fisted he was by his environment. Overall, Sunday is only loved for being good, so it is no wonder that curiosity, art, individuality, and experimentation suddenly vanish from his journals and lifestyle as he learns that presentation and control are the safer and more important alternative to simply being himself. Gopher Wood then reinforces these habits, as despite being Sunday's adoptive father, he is simultaneously hypercritical and never around, leaving Sunday to continue perfecting himself for any sort of validation. In other words, both familial and religious love are taught to him as conditional, so all he can think to do is focus on meeting those conditions. He states that the feeling of having everything in order is not bad, but not bad is still a far cry from good. It leaves him conditioned to chase solace, the idea of finding comfort through external factors such as approval and maintaining his image, as opposed to genuine happiness within himself as a person. But sometimes solace is all it takes to maintain an idolized persona. Importantly, Sunday has no comparison point to realize that these experiences are not normal, letting him focus on becoming a chameleon that adapts to the needs and expectations of others instead of developing real agency over his own life. Even in the case of Gopher Wood, Sunday only notes that he thought the man was kind and that he doesn't want things to end up poorly. That's also why you see him blaming external factors for everything that goes wrong, as his upbringing internalized the idea that he does not have free will. So what exactly does this idealized persona I keep mentioning entail? Common in a wide variety of trauma-based conditions, it is often referred to by psychologists as either the false self, the protective self, or an ego, and it tends to unconsciously manifest through control-seeking behaviors that allow a person to avoid their real emotions. In the case of Sunday, he no longer needs to grapple with shame, as he can turn his attention external by drowning himself in work and fixating on maintaining order, creating the image of a hard-working, perfect person who is never swayed by emotion. Successfully maintaining this image will bring him comfort that distracts him from shame, giving him that comfortable, not bad feeling. But as with anything, ignoring underlying problems will only make them worse. Again, we see Sunday's natural personality fade more and more over time. If you look at his letters to Robin and his character stories, you'll notice that they lose flavor as he gets older. While he signs his early letters off, saying "Support you always, your big brother," his 3rd letter simply says "Head of Oak Family, Sunday." In addition, all of the lines where he speaks about his actual feelings and emotions are crossed out, allowing us to see only scraps of what appear to be apologies for not keeping up with her and proclamations that everything is his fault, scraps of the emotions he no longer can express. Enthusiastic statements about what he is excited about are replaced with formalities, and he only speaks about important professional matters. Everything that made Sunday Sunday disappears, as how could the untouchable, esteemed Sunday ever break down, or secretly be a huge fan of his sister's cutesy idol music? Another way his identity is explored comes from his transition from a pianist to a conductor. His 2.7 letters and character demo speak of his passion for playing the piano, and yet such an important hobby of his had no mention for the first 10 months of him appearing in-game. Instead, he is painted as a conductor, the supreme tuner. It's a very literal metaphor for his shifting ideals, as Sunday goes from a place where he is personally expressing himself through his own music that is vulnerable to mistakes, to a position where he controls and guides others while remaining untouchable himself. I want to talk more about Sunday guiding other people though, as that is his main method of keeping his false self afloat, I've mentioned this before, but the thing about the Penacony dreamscape is that every long-term resident is someone who is struggling or vulnerable in some way. After all, why would they subject themselves to the permanent escapism of the dream world unless they were unable to achieve what they wanted in reality? The Stellaron within the dream then weakens them further, and all of the NPCs the player can interact with speak of major regrets and the troubles they no longer have to face, instead turning to Sunday for guidance and his associated lifestyle where they no longer know what they want. From Sunday's perspective, though, he believes he is speaking to and guiding a wide variety of travelers who represent the whole cosmos. It lets Sunday believe he is strong, as he is the one person who is able to keep himself perfectly composed while continuing to tell others what to do. But he is still only the strongest of the people who are too weak to live in reality, the conductor of those who are in some way not good enough. And as soon as he sees an authentically strong person, such as the Astral Express members, he dismisses them as untouchable heroes disconnected from reality. It creates a safe bubble that fuels his image of perfection, protecting him from shame while his attention remains focused on problems other than his own. Ironically, a key problem with hyper-focusing on other people and appearances is that it prevents you from actually understanding them, which is a trap that Sunday often falls into. After all, he can only get so close to others if he's more focused on guiding them and getting them to believe his image, as opposed to expressing genuine curiosity about their lives. And even then, he is too out of tune with his own feelings to be able to share anything about himself in the first place, leading to unbalanced relationships built on work instead. Many of the people who actually do attempt to interact with him on a deeper level are quick to label him paranoid or crazy, and his relationship with Robin is a key example of him struggling to understand someone despite being close to them. In his final letter, he admits that he has a hard time not seeing her as a child who needs protection, which is a concept that plays into the strengths and flaws of both characters. An idea explored by the siblings is that of what it means to mature. While Robin is often painted as naive, romantic, and idealistic for being expressive and optimistic, Sunday is framed as smart, scholarly, and mature for his rigid analytical thinking and cautionary nature, at least by Gopher Wood. And yet, if you think about it, the opposite is true. Robin had learned to act stoic from a young age, but became optimistic and expressive again after going out and seeing the world and finding herself, as opposed to Sunday, who was a highly emotional child that learned to suppress his personality due to being trapped in a controlling environment. Robin's immature traits are in reality a sign of her maturity, while Sunday's mature traits are more of a trauma response keeping him trapped. Still, Sunday does not have the life experiences to understand this, and continues to underestimate Robin, not even thinking she would recognize him through his disguise despite how smart she is in reality. Robin is far from the only person that Sunday underestimates as well. Throughout the 2.7 quest, a recurring idea is that Sunday feels the need to handle the whole Penacony situation on his own due to a combination of guilt and automatically assuming other people will not be able to fix their problems, which connects back to the idea of him building an environment exclusive to those weaker than himself. Just like your average group project member, it does not occur to Sunday that someone else could ever do as thorough of a job as him, and while 1 week continues to assure him of the family's competence, Sunday continues to pick up more and more of their tasks instead. The reasons for his behavior extend beyond just believing other people are incapable, though. A trait 1 week mentions is that being taken to task after a setback is the only way that Sunday can feel better about himself, and that by comparison, being shown sympathy would hit him where it hurts. This thought process is a major signifier for a protective self, as it again focuses on the external. If Sunday successfully completed a bunch of tasks, it would reinforce his positive self-image, framing him as a helpful and orderly person. However, if he were to be shown sympathy, it could trigger some of his suppressed shame, causing defensiveness as he is forced to sit with the fact that he cannot take action to correct what happened. I want to give a real-life example on a smaller scale to help explain this phenomenon. Let's say you're going home and realize that you forgot to wash the dishes. Maybe you've forgotten multiple times and you start to worry that your housemates will view you as a subpar person to live with. If they gave you a chance to quickly do said forgotten dishes when you got home, you might feel better, as you can quickly reestablish that you are in fact competent. However, if they did not, you would have to actually sit with and process both your mistake and their disappointment in you. The former is an external solution that saves your ego to help you feel better in the short term, but the latter is an internal solution that forces you to accept and learn from failure. Sunday's obsession with working and doing favors protects him from feelings of failure, allowing him to maintain his image at the cost of not growing. It's also because of this mindset that Sunday has such strong feelings towards failure in the first place. When Wanwick sarcastically asks him when the last time he failed was, Sunday takes it literally and immediately recites both his exact age and the event, commenting that he would never forget the time of failure. And the event in question is just a silly and even endearing thing he did as a kid. He literally thought he could fly and almost broke his halo. It further demonstrates how sensitive he is to have remembered something most people would not consider to be bad, and how guarded he became to have avoided making another mistake since childhood. This idea is exacerbated by Sunday's identity as a celebrity, as any mistakes he makes will become the center of public attention. Gopherwood taught him this lesson early on, giving him full control of Aideen Park as a kid, so that all of Penacony would witness the mess of him making a rule that you can't put trash into trash cans. It further reinforces the teaching that Sunday should never allow himself to be seen as imperfect. It all comes together to create a state of chronic paranoia and control-seeking that Sunday has to live in to maintain his lifestyle. Sunday constantly mentions that he is not willing to take risks, and his vulnerability avoidance is reflected in every aspect of his day-to-day life. People cannot reject him if he never shows his true personality. People cannot abandon him if he is their guiding figure while they are vulnerable. People cannot see flaws or emotions if he keeps appearances in perfect order. People cannot fault him if every statement he makes can be backed by hours of his own analytical reasoning. And there are so many more examples of how he has built his life around maintaining this untouchable protective persona. It makes his role as the leader of a dream world very literal. He lives through delusions, and he is likely completely unaware of how superficial his life is, as from his own perspective, these are just the habits that he learned will keep him safe and stable after having faced repeated rejection and failure in childhood. The habits he would even see as sacrificing himself for the sake of others. I broke down all of his specific tendencies from that angle in my last video, but from the outside, these behaviors can be indistinguishable from that of a narcissist seeking supply, especially with Sunday becoming the equivalent of a god for weak people to turn to. Complex trauma in general, especially in the case of repression, can lead people to develop these traits to protect themselves. It explains why narcissistic family structures often exist in a cycle, though the reasons and intentions behind the behaviors vary heavily. With Sunday's dependence on the dream and lack of a true identity, having his world crumble at the hands of both his sister and the very people he had dismissed as lesser is both the biggest and most literal wake-up call he could have ever been given. The After the Charmony Fall light cone states that he felt neither happiness nor sadness, just a desire to close his eyes. There is nothing left to fuel his protective self, and yet he is so disconnected from his actual feelings that there is no longer a true self to turn to, leaving only his shame to come flooding out. That is the dilemma that many repressed individuals face when grounded, and Sunday is no exception. His status as a fugitive creates a strong symbol for his own feelings. As soon as his false self is shattered, Sunday is left feeling like an outsider in his own home, one that would be ashamed to be so much as seen by other people. Throughout the quest, the focus is often not on the danger of being arrested, but on how Sunday mentally cannot handle being seen. When discussing whether he should say goodbye to Robin before leaving, Sunday only mentions how he cannot bring himself to see her while he is a fugitive, and even when he does go through with the visit, he remains in a disguise the whole time, noting that he only meant to stay quietly by her side for a bit, as opposed to feeling authentically worthy of her presence. Lastly, he describes his desire to speak with her as his selfishness, implying the belief that he is intruding upon her. It's a far cry from reality, where Robin cares for and misses her dear brother desperately, having spent a whole side quest looking for him when he initially fell. At the end of the day, Sunday has to be able to accept himself before he can allow himself to be accepted by others, and even then, he first needs to find his identity before he can even begin to put it out there. The song for Robin and Sunday's farewell, Had I Not Seen the Sun, encapsulates a lot of the pair's conflicted feelings, both in terms of their personal relationship and the different ways that the two had grown up. The phonograph description for the song states from Robin's perspective, "Had I not seen the sun, I could have borne the dark, but the sunlight has illuminated my loneliness, making it all the more desolate." It is reflective of Robin's feelings, where going out and traveling and seeing the world allowed her to find herself and regain her hope in others, which in turn makes it feel impossible to return to a sheltered escapist environment like Penacony. On the contrary, Sunday is the character who never saw the sun. The dark is the only life he has ever known, and as such, he had been capable of resigning himself to a superficial life. There is no happy comparison point to make his loneliness apparent, which lets him focus fully on becoming a sun for others that he himself can never live in the light of. At least, not until Robin's song awakens him at the end of the story. When the two fall from the sky together, the sun rises for the first time, making it both the first moment Sunday can see the light of day and the last moment Sunday can bear the dark of his illusions. Robin's lines about the sun take on yet another meaning following 2.7, as the song being her goodbye piece to Sunday allows us to interpret its meanings in the context of her direct feelings toward him. Sunday is still connected to the sun, with 1 week even referring to him as Sunny throughout the questline. As opposed to the sun referring to a world of hope this time though, it refers to Sunday's past self, the softer Sunday who stole her desserts and played the piano for his pet bird to make it happy. Throughout the farewell, Robin continues to hint at how much she misses him. She mentions that she hopes he never changes, and that despite it all, she has faith in the person she remembers him to be. Having met Sunday before he repressed his personality is a huge part of why Robin feels so devastated now, as she has seen the closest person in her life go from vibrant and bright to a shallow shell of who he used to be, leaving her alone with memories. Again, had she not seen the sun, she could have borne the dark, but the sun has illuminated her loneliness, making it all the more desolate. I mentioned that the years of superficiality have left little remaining of Sunday's true self, and this idea is something that his confrontation with 1 week dives deep into. Before I get into that though, I want to establish my interpretation of 1 week, which is that 1 week is an alternative version of Sunday that never suppressed his personality. It adds a darker side to the lines where Sunday tells 1 week that he is the only reason 1 week is alive, and that he showed him a way to live when he was abandoned at his wit's end. All younger Sunday had was himself, and his false self that protected his true self, paralleling his adult form, who was now in the opposite scenario. Supporting this interpretation, though, is the fact that in the quest, Sunday states that 1 week is another possibility of him, and that while Sunday's personal aspirations grew faint after childhood, 1 week shows who he may have become with a different upbringing. He then comments on how he envies some of 1 week's traits, and that he wishes he too could joke around, express his thoughts, or openly share both his dislike and his love for others. It paints a clear picture of just how disconnected Sunday is, as he sees all of these normal feelings as things he could never express, things that are no longer a part of himself. And yet, the situation is much more complicated than Sunday wishing he could just be his old self again. The thing about Sunday is that he no longer likes who he was before, but he is not happy with the person he has become either. In terms of his past self, Sunday expresses open dislike of both 1 week and frivolous people in general, noting that he could never be like them, and that it makes him uncomfortable to even emulate them. In other words, he hates the idea of lacking purpose behind his actions, which is something that many people with complex trauma struggle with. It becomes difficult to enjoy frivolous leisure activities or experience spontaneous happiness when living with ingrained hypervigilance. After all, how is Sunday supposed to relax or do something silly when he is too busy overthinking and worrying about failure? The answer is he can't, as there are actual changes in the brain that make it difficult for unhealed people to do so. This tendency is also why Robin states that Sunday would struggle to stand back up after failure, despite seeming strong, as she knows he would agonize over what the right course of action is for ages before ever doing anything. It all builds into an impossible dilemma. On one hand, Sunday found a profound sense of purpose through the grand goals his trauma pushed him toward, but he also has to grapple with the fact that this purpose came at the cost of his entire personality and spirit. He became the perfect image of order and discipline, and was so close to achieving his lifelong dream, but he also became paranoid, alone, and unfeeling. As 1 week states, his expressions are dull and lifeless, and besides discipline and hesitation, there's nothing else in his life. Neither version of himself is comfortable anymore, as he has become too dutiful to freely enjoy trivialities like 1 week, but he can no longer be satisfied by working either. That's why Sunday leaves his final confrontation with 1 week to fate, eager to see if combining his two sides could create a better version of himself, allowing him to finally let go of the him of yesterday. And with that, we can finally dive into how Sunday's going to get better. Even in just the short time of his new quest, he has made an insane amount of progress. His dream shattering has made it painfully apparent that no number of distractions will help anymore. There is nothing left to support his delusions, leading him to face his issues head-on instead. As many psychologists will tell you, the only way out is through, which is an idea that Penacony's story thrives upon. As Sunday returns to the Grand Theater, he states, "Falling is just another name for flying." That's why I rejoice at my broken wings. Step into the mortal world and see how it truly is. Then, be born as a human and die as one. In other words, Sunday is giving himself permission to be human here, to fail, to feel, to suffer, to learn, and to grow, as falling is the only way that he may one day fly, and one day live as a real human instead of a perfect persona. It parallels Robin's past lines about the Charmony Dove, where she claimed that when flight is not inherent, it can still be achieved through determination. Perhaps the idea is still flowery and romantic, but Sunday has learned to chase dreams in reality. Severing his halo, a symbol of Sunday's connection to both the Harmony and family, is another way of showing his decision. For once, Sunday is able to be simply Sunday, not the head of the Oak family, or the boy who was too weak for his faith. He states that a core reason he threw away the halo is to feel pain, which is not to torture himself, but to feel the feelings he had locked away for the entirety of his life, the ones he still needs to process and grow from. The pain of processing a lifetime's worth of dissociation is beyond words, hence his constant crying in his new animations. But again, it is not just the only option left for him, but also the unskippable first step toward recovery. The most important part of these changes, though, is the fact that Sunday is forcing himself to embrace uncertainty. Remaining tied to the Harmony and order may have left him in chronic paranoia, but it also gave him a stable and predictable life. It stems from the finding that many real victims have a block toward experimenting with new options, preferring to remain in the fear or toxic environment that has become familiar. Upon freeing himself, Sunday mentions feeling unsettled and scared, as he can no longer control everything. But he forces himself to face his fear of the unknown despite it. He speaks of realizing he needs to seek knowledge over asceticism, which is an effective way to summarize this entire dilemma. His problem is not that he needs more discipline, needs to indulge less, or needs to accomplish more. It's the fact that those same disciplined habits have crushed his curiosity about the world, because anything outside his control or prediction becomes a threat. What he needs is to become open to learning again. Sunday's newfound journey then becomes the perfect way to begin his recovery. It forces him to break out of his comfort zone, to live as a human and get to know people authentically, exposing himself to every possible thing that could ever hurt his ego. The Astral Express provides him with an environment of strong individuals who live according to their personal values, allowing what previously threatened him to become an inspiration, as Sunday himself embodies everything that the Path of Trailblaze stands for. In spite of all he has been through, he chooses to travel, to put himself out there, to embrace curiosity and to meet new people, all so he can learn enough to become a better version of himself, as opposed to continuing to identify with an injured bird that chooses to hide in a safe cage. He states that he will join the weak in reaching his hand toward the sky, allowing him to finally see the sun. The biggest support for him in doing so is Welt, as their conversations challenge Sunday's worldview and help him understand that it is okay for him to be himself. Throughout the full Penacony story, Welt sees everything wrong with Sunday. In 2.2, he caught on instantly to Sunday lying about the Harmony, which Sunday effectively imprisoned him for. He then saw Sunday use the dream world in a way that trapped thousands of people in it, tuning their minds into believing they were happy. And now, he got to see the broken version of Sunday that was too ashamed to show himself, apologize, or even say goodbye to Robin when his plan fell apart. Even after all of that, Welt is still able to see Sunday's authentic character, his desire to make people happy, the ways in which he was misguided, his determination to improve, and most importantly the fact that there is still hope for him. After being shut down by his family, deemed too weak for his faith, and crushed beneath personal failure, Sunday is met with someone who tells him, "You are one of my trailblazing goals. Essentially, you are worth saving and I want to help you despite how broken you are." It teaches Sunday that there are people who are both stronger and more virtuous than him, people who cannot be manipulated by him, that can see him for all he is and still believe in him and want to see him improve with no ulterior motive. Even if Sunday doubts he has the will to be like those people, it still gives him the courage to stop isolating himself and join them. Once aboard the Express, we see bits of Sunday's personality start to come back. His insistence on perfection had already begun to fall through, as shown by him begrudgingly making peace with wearing an uncoordinated outfit. But we also start to see some of his hobbies and quirks resurfacing. He mentions bringing desserts with him, and notes in his letter to Robin that her pudding tarts still taste the same as he remembers. The biggest example, though, comes from the fact that he starts to play the piano again, a form of self-expression that comes at the guarantee of making mistakes. He mentions not remembering the last time he had played it, as he had again fallen out of anything vulnerable or characterizing, but he expresses a lot of enthusiasm toward the idea of returning to his old hobby. Many text messages you receive from him include long paragraphs discussing the intricacies of his favorite pieces, allowing you to see his genuine interest, and he is also open about going back to easier songs as opposed to insisting upon playing the most complex or difficult ones. It is a major contrast to the perfect Sunday, who only listened to others, never sharing anything about himself. His growing authenticity and love of music brings me to my next point, which is that he begins to work on improving his relationship with Robin and expressing his admiration of her. His most recent letter to her shows his returning sweet tooth, as he begins accepting her sweets again, and he tells her directly that he wishes to attempt flight the same way the little Charmony dove once did. There is a massive amount of weight to this claim, as remember, Robin had originally only realized she was trapped in the Order's dream due to being shown an illusion of Sunday saying just that. The idea of him changing had been unrealistic enough to make her wake up from a false reality where he did, and here he is making that exact improvement in the real world, while also coming clean about seeing her as a child and accepting that she has long since grown up. His sign-off additionally returns to referring to himself as her big brother, as opposed to an esteemed title, making his effort to restore their sibling bond clear. Of course, there is still much progress to be made, as Sunday has yet to be able to tell Robin explicitly how much he looks up to her. We see that every time he texts us, he is listening to her songs, and he is quick to advertise them to the Astral Express members. Very real of him. And yet, despite having said that he wishes he could tell her how much he loves her music, he makes no mention of it in his letter. He is still building up his courage, and his time as a trailblazer gives him a safe space to explore himself and his feelings as he recuperates. It is quite fitting that he is always listening to the song Had I Not Seen the Sun, as he is now on his own journey to live in the light. All of these changes leave a lot of room for him to reflect on the life he has led thus far. Sunday mentions that when sitting alone on the Express, he tends to get an overwhelming urge to clean everything, noting that he thinks it stems from boredom. This struggle to be bored or sit with your own thoughts tends to be at the root of dissociative behaviors like overworking, as one's protective self will do anything it can to keep negative feelings out. You may also be reminded of OCD, as the game mentions directly that Sunday suffers from obsessive compulsions like this one, and it is also one of the many conditions that is more common in complex trauma due to trauma's horrible impact on executive functioning. Sunday forcing himself to sit with and process his negative thoughts, though, instead of acting on his compulsive habits, ultimately helps him heal, which actually mirrors exposure and response therapy, a treatment for OCD where the patient learns to do exactly that. It teaches Sunday to take back his agency and become more in tune with his actual feelings. As he grows, Sunday's expressions and demeanor also face a drastic shift. It is especially apparent in his demo trailer, where we see his past self hold a contemptuous smirk, while his present self simply appears determined and focused. His narcissistic tendencies lessen with time, as he has developed his own authentic goals that do not require any sort of manipulation or grandiosity to achieve, and his speech becomes both genuine and friendly. He still does not smile much, as reaching a happy baseline takes time, but he is determined to get there. It is represented quite well by the thorn symbolism on his design. I've talked extensively about the way thorns are a symbol of hardship, pain, and sins, of the way they are always associated with the parts of his design tied to his past self, and yet, Sunday continues to reach to the sky every single time they wrap around him and drag him down, claiming that he will overcome the thorns, he will wake up from his dreams, and that's something that anyone can do, as when you are born with broken wings, hope is the thing with feathers. Despite all that has been done to him, all that he has done to others, and all of the years he missed out on, Sunday still chooses to embrace his true self and reach his hand toward the sky, beginning a grounded ascent. No more expectations, no more escaping into his dreams, no more forcing himself to conform. Through immeasurable pain, failure, acceptance, and determination, the path to liberation is built. And after a lifetime of being taught that free will is an illusion, he has found the strength to build it with his own hands.
On this 8th day, I grant myself departure.
To those of you who made it to the end, I just want to say thank you, as I again think there is a lot to learn from analyzing media in this kind of way. A lot of psychology research tends to stay out of the public eye, so I think characters like Sunday, who explore these concepts in so much depth, provide such an interesting way to communicate it. especially in a time like now where the topics are growing increasingly relevant. If you agree, I'd appreciate any support thrown my way, as these videos seriously take ages to make, and I would really love to be able to dedicate more of my time toward working on them. Again, I have a Ko-fi page set up now if you'd like to support me, and I'm interested in potentially talking about Alhaitham, Kaveh, and a number of Zelda games in the future, so let me know if you'd be interested. And lastly, if you identify with any of the issues I talked about, or if you know someone who does, then I hope this project can be of help, and that you know that you will always be good enough to get better. That said, thank you again, and do take care.